Real stories of werewolves, of dogmen from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Hey all, I'm working on a really special episode for you guys. It's taking a bit longer to finish than I had anticipated, but I've got this collection of strange Dogman stories from Connecticut that I've picked out of our vault specially for you tonight. This one is light on animations, but heavy on Google Street Views of the actual locations that these events allegedly took place at. Let's start it off with this creepy cryptid remembrance that we call the Connecticut River Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, as a kid, I heard that my Uncle Kent saw a real-life werewolf on the island in the middle of the Connecticut River when he was driving down Hockenham Road. This was the version of the story that my grandmother told. I kept bugging my parents to take me to see this Werewolf Island, as I had come to call it. My brain was lit up with the idea that the Wolfman might be a real thing. My parents kept telling me that my grandmother just liked to tell stories, and that this was something old people did a lot. I didn't care. There was a chance that werewolves were real, and there was a chance I could see one, and it was only about a 35-minute drive from where we lived. So I wanted to go see for myself. It literally took me years to convince them, but when I was 8 or 9, we were going to visit relatives, and it would only take us a little out of our way if we went down Hockenham Road. My mother talked my father into doing it, quote, just to shut him up once and for all, unquote. Little did they know that would only be the start of my interest in such things. So, on that fateful day, we drove down Hockenham Road, and I was so excited I was ready to explode. It was a bright, sunny summer day, and the first thing we noticed as we got near to the island was that as we passed it, there was no way to see it, at least not from Hockenham Road. Why? There were too many trees in between on the shoreline near the road, and they pretty well blocked the view of the island completely. Now will you stop bugging us about werewolves? Asked my father impatiently, but I didn't answer. I was disappointed, that's for certain, and I felt about 89% less sure that a werewolf might be a real thing. But I felt strongly that it was better to cling to that 11% positive feeling than to give in to my father's bleak and unimaginative worldview. No point in being a grown-up before you absolutely have to. That was how I felt about things back then, and that's probably how I still feel. Grandma came over to the house on Mother's Day, and I told her all about our trip down Hockenham and how the trees blocked our view. Grandma said we got the story wrong. According to her, Uncle Kent had seen the Wolfman in the dead of winter when the trees were bare. I was still skeptical, but she had rekindled hope that the story might have some validity to it. Boy, was my dad mad at her for doing that. They grumbled at each other for the rest of the day, but I didn't care because my head was dancing with visions of Dogman living in Connecticut. Then, the next Christmas, Uncle Kent himself came to stay with us for the holiday. This was an event I excitedly waited weeks for. I might have been almost as excited about getting to talk to him in person as I was about Christmas itself. When we finally got to talk, he said the Dogman he saw was not on the island. It was walking out of the trees next to Hockenham Road. Grandma angrily insisted that he had told her he saw it on the island, and an argument ensued. Uncle Kent waited until Grandma was done bellowing. Then he told her that the werewolf, as he called it, was coming from the direction of the island, and it was drenched, soaked in water, dripping. He thought it might have just swam from the island, which he thought was how my grandmother got confused about how the story went. Grandma still insisted he was telling the story wrong, but this new version made more sense to me, and my parents began to realize that I was never, ever going to tire of this subject. I was more interested in whether Dogman was real than if Santa was real. Actually, none of us called him Dogman. It was either the Wolfman or a werewolf in our terminology in those days. Although I do call him a Dogman now, the first time I heard that term was, I think, in reference to the Michigan Dogman, which in the stories I heard back then stayed down on all fours. This thing that Uncle Kent claimed to see walked like a werewolf on its hind legs. I stayed fascinated by the subject for years. Both bipedal and quadrupedal werewolves and dogmen were fascinating to me. But eventually, I grew more interested in girls and less interested in monsters. Well, for a few years at least. One summer, I was home from college and I was hanging out with some friends. We decided to go down toward the Oxbow, which used to be a looping side part of the Connecticut River, but now was cut off by the highway over there, so it was a C-shaped body of water, shaped like the letter C. People keep their boats at a marina there these days, and it's a nice place to be on a warm day. But we were young, and we soon got bored, and we started wandering over toward the wildlife sanctuary to the west. Dogman was the furthest thing from our minds. In fact, I remember hanging out by a pond there and talking about the Connecticut River monster. I think that was supposed to be a giant eel. It had been seen back in the late 1800s in the Connecticut River itself, but one of our friends reminded us that the Oxbow, and possibly that pond too, had once been part of the Connecticut River, and so maybe the monster lived in the nature reserve now instead of out in the wild. It started getting later in the day, and we really should have started back toward the car, which was a good 40-minute walk from where we were. But being young and feeling free, we wandered a bit into the woods instead. I knew we were heading even further from the car by doing this, but I had no schedule or any place to be, and I had planned on sleeping late the next morning anyway. I didn't know when I would see these friends again, and they didn't know when they would see me, so we all walked further and further into nowhere. We had the feeling of strength in numbers coupled with our youth, and we felt immortal and unbeatable, so onward and onward we went into the unknown. Eventually, we came upon a log and sat down on it, then began telling each other ghost stories. Or, well, at least one of us started doing it, because within minutes we heard a crashing sound, and out of the trees ran this immense, dog-like creature. It was bipedal, and it ran like a dinosaur or an ostrich on its hind legs, but it had front paws it held up, and a very large, dog-like head. The head seemed too large for its body, but the legs were so massively strong, they looked as though they could support nearly any weight. I mean, these legs were like tree trunks. So it ran out of the trees, and it seemed to be looking for something. We all shut up and just stared at the thing, which suddenly noticed us, and everything went all quiet. It was pretty dark in there, but it was only dusk, so we could still see the creature pretty well. It bent over forward in our direction and seemed to be smelling to get more information about us. We held perfectly still and just hoped it would get bored and move on. No such luck. The thing charged toward us, and we ran back over the log we had been sitting on and into the woods beyond. We were well off any path and in pure wilderness. The dog barked in a way that was at once both playful and deeply savage. It felt more like it wanted to play with us than eat us, but it had to be over 8 feet tall and as strong as 5 men, so I wasn't sure we would survive much playtime with Fido. I heard a scream, and to my right, I saw one of my friends grabbed by the back of his collar by the monster Dogman. It didn't grab him with its hand or paw. It grabbed him with its fang-filled mouth. I never noted whether it had fingers on its paws. Maybe they were like other normal dog paws, and maybe the only way it could have grabbed him was with its teeth. But either way, that's how he did it. He dragged my friend back, and I expected the worst to happen. I stopped running and just stood there, watching. The dog pulled my friend back along the ground until he was underneath the huge monster. Then he did the most surprising thing I'd ever seen. He flung my friend forward through the air. He basically threw him by his collar, and he must have been 15 feet or more off the ground as he went crashing into the trunk of a tree, careening off one side of it, then slamming to the ground. Hard. I ran over, terrified at what I might find, but when I reached my friend, he had already regained his footing and was shouting at me to run. Run! And so I did. After that, we ran until I felt I could run no further, and then we ran some more. I never knew I had such reserves of strength inside me because I never had to find out before. We could hear the Dogman behind us, and we knew we couldn't stop. Then we stopped. Why? Not by choice, I'll tell you that much. We stopped and looked up, and up, and up at what was blocking our path. It was the mother of all dogmen, a huge female that made the male running up behind us seem like a toddler by comparison. This was too large to be possible. I felt completely insane just being on the same planet as what I was looking at. We were all so exhausted that we just laid down and waited for the worst to happen. It wasn't like we had any place else to go or any more energy to take us there. We had a giant dogman chasing us from behind, and a much larger one blocking our way to the front. I imagined there were more on either side of us, and I began to cry, thinking of all the people back at school I would never see again, and my parents, and my dog, and so on. I began regretting all the things I wished I had done, the people I would never get to say goodbye to, the girls I had never gotten the nerve to ask out. I think it was sort of like my life flashing in front of my eyes, as they say in books. I was preparing myself for whatever comes after life, and I was accepting my fate. The giant female dog in front of us began walking in our direction, and I could hear my other friends crying as loudly as I was. One step toward us, and the ground shook. Another step in our direction, and I could feel the earth tremble underneath me. One more step, and the monster was directly between me and a friend of mine. Then, surprising all of us, it took another step, and another, and soon it was well past us. Sitting up, confused, I looked behind us and saw the mother dogman grabbing the merely immense male dogman by the scruff of his neck like a mother cat grabbing a kitten. They walked off a few feet with him in her mouth. She tossed him to the ground, and he assumed a submissive posture. This was her son. It had to be. If that's the case, I realized, I didn't want to wait around to meet Daddy. I took off, and my friends followed. We didn't know where we were running, but we ran. As long as it was away from those dog things, then it seemed like it must be the right direction. We eventually came out in a large field behind someone's backyard. Stumbling and walking in exhaustion, we were met by the people who lived there. They gave us a lemonade and brought us inside their house to catch our breath. They listened to our story wild-eyed, unsure of whether to believe us or not. They had never heard of such a thing, especially not in their own backyard, almost literally. They didn't seem to think we were lying. They probably thought we were on something, if you know what I mean. But they were kind people, and after we had recovered a bit, they drove us back to where we had parked our car, and our Dogman adventure was officially over. Now, we were not on anything that day, and I know we didn't imagine or hallucinate those two huge animals. On the other hand, such things simply could not possibly exist. Not in that forest, not in Connecticut, not in the United States, not on this planet, at least not so close to civilization, not without us ever noticing them before. So, we each came up with our own theory as to what had actually happened. One of us thought maybe the Dogman were from underground, and that they only came up to the surface on rare occasions, or only at dusk to hunt. Another of us, a psych major, thought we had witnessed Jungian archetypes of some sort. Another had a variation on that theory, saying that they must have been racial memories of a creature that probably lived in the ancient past in that very forest. Just like how an embryo develops gills before it develops lungs, maybe our minds, or our DNA, are programmed to remember species from the Earth's past that no longer actually live here. I don't share any of those theories, though. I just admit, I have no idea what we saw and what chased us. I don't know where they came from, and I don't know where they went to. All I do know is that they could have destroyed us, and yet they didn't. I have never, in all my days, ever gone back to that nature preserve, and I have never returned to the Oxbow area. In fact, I don't even like to drive anywhere near the Connecticut River at all. It's because of the intense fear I felt on that evening when I and my friends were chased and almost scared to oblivion by the Connecticut River Dogman.
Find that link in the description, honey.
I don't hear too many stories about Dogman in Connecticut. In fact, I didn't even know he could afford to live there. But at least one upright walking canid seems to have ventured into the state, according to the person who sent us an email entitled The Dogman of Danbury, Connecticut, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When my wife Paula and I were newlyweds, and that was a long time ago, we used to sometimes visit her parents, who lived in Danbury, Connecticut. On the drive there one time, for some reason, we both started talking about this one little turnoff on the highway on the way there. It seemed to lead to a patch of dirt. I wondered if it went deeper into the woods and if it led to anywhere. She wondered the same thing. It oddly led to us discussing it further on the way home. I suggested we go and check it out one time, park there, and walk into the woods. Paula said that if it were a place for people to pull over who had car trouble, that our car might get towed away and the woods might get searched if we left the car there. Then again, it might go unnoticed for months, who knew? We decided if we ever checked that out, we would leave a note on the dashboard saying we went into the forest and would be back by some given time. We were both satisfied that we had a solid plan. Then we proceeded to forget about all of this for almost a decade. It came after our first serious fight and breakup, or after we made up, I mean. We were in a nostalgic mood, and the subject of that area off of the highway in Danbury came up. Her parents had moved to Florida years earlier, so we hadn't had a reason to be out there for a long time. We debated about the note we would leave on the windshield. Should we handwrite it? Should we type it up and print it out? Would that make it look like a kidnapping? What exactly should the note say? Believe it or not, I was actually excited as we went on a drive out to Danbury on that warm October afternoon. My wife was driving, and as we approached the spot in question, she slowed down for the turnoff. I suddenly felt the most extreme feeling that we had made a mistake and we should not be where we were. I clutched the seat of the car as though we were in an airplane coming in for a landing. After parking, my wife caught the expression on my face and burst out laughing. I must have looked really weirded out because that's how I felt. So we got out, leaving our carefully agreed upon sign in the front windshield saying we'd be back by 3:30. We had agreed to make it handwritten so that we could write in the time once we got there. It was around 2:20 p.m., so we figured we'd be certain to be back by 3:30. Paula walked off into the woods and I trailed behind her, staring around me like I'd never seen a tree before. Everything seemed so strange to me and uninviting. I won't say I heard a voice in my head telling me to get out, but I won't say I didn't. Every atom of me wanted to get the heck out of that forest, but I couldn't think of a logical reason why. I was afraid to mention it to my wife because she's usually the one who has instinctive feelings about things, and I have often mocked her for this trait. I couldn't really expect her to be nice to me if I suddenly was the one sensing something strange and otherworldly. I was so on edge, I didn't want to hear her laugh at me. So it was a very confusing moment. We were walking along a beaten down path, having no idea where we were going. Paula wondered if we would encounter something wonderful. I wondered if we were walking into some kind of terrible trap. I guess we both sort of got our wishes fulfilled, as in the next second, we both heard a growling noise. Less than a minute into the forest, and we'd already been encountered by a threatening predator. We just turned right around and started heading back out when we heard more growling. In front of us, Paula whispered that it sounded like a dog pack, or maybe coyotes. I figured she must be right, but I couldn't see them anywhere, and the growling seemed to be coming from the trees over our heads. I could not imagine or visualize what we were hearing, and I wasn't sure what direction to walk in. We both stood in that one spot, turning around, hearing sounds suggesting that we'd been surrounded. I was so frightened, I can't even begin to describe it to you. It was my feeling that I had come to life. It turned out I was right. I really had felt some sort of negative energy emerging from this location. But what good did that do for me? I still didn't know what to do. There was a sound like bushes moving behind us, and when we turned around, what we saw took our breath away. It was this evil-looking dog thing from somebody's nightmare. It stood on its hind legs, but it was hunched over, kind of like a tyrannosaur or a kangaroo. But its arms were much longer than either of those, and they ended in sick-looking claws. It had the head of a coyote or dingo or some kind of dog, but its ears were taller than a dog's ears, almost as long as a rabbit or a hare. It bared its teeth at me, and they looked much more like a dog's teeth than a rabbit or rodent's. Its head was a little higher than me, and I'm 6 feet tall. I had to look up to see it, and this creature was bending over. So it had to be 7 or 8 feet tall if it were standing at full height. When it focused on us, its eyes almost popped out of their sockets. I never saw a thing so furiously angry before. It was almost like you could see the veins popping out under its fur. It was that unhappy at our presence. The thing let out a scream, or a bark, or a roar. I don't know what it was, but I felt almost as though the sound were physically battering into me. This was all a very extreme experience, and both of us were screaming in shock. We ran away from the thing, but I remembered there was at least one more of the creatures hiding in the direction in which we were running. There was a good chance we might get into even more trouble running in this direction, but what choice did we have? This was the direction of our car. We ran to that car and Paula fumbled with the keys, Those were the days when you used your key to open the car door, or at least we did with that old car. As she got in, I knew she'd unlock my door in a second, so I turned my head to look behind me and see what was there. My knees gave out, and I had to hold onto the car to keep standing up. There was that same Dogman from before, standing at the edge of the woodline, watching us. And there, next to him, was another Dogman that had to be 1.5 times as tall as the first one. That was what we ran past? We ran past this 11 or 12 foot tall behemoth without knowing it? There's no way we would have done it if we knew what we were doing. So it's lucky for us that we didn't. On the way home, I told Paula about my feeling that I had as we drove up to the place, that we shouldn't go inside. She tore into me, not making fun of me for having that feeling, but she was upset with me for not sharing my feelings with her. She said it was my fault that we almost got ourselves killed. It led to another big fight between us, and we took some time off of the marriage, I have to admit. We were fine again in less than a month, but I don't think either of us will ever fully get over the experience. I mean, it's not like it happened in a random spot. It happened in a place we had weirdly spoken about for years. There was no apparent reason why that one turnoff in Danbury would be so interesting to us. It was almost like something laid a trap for us and took 10 years to spring it. But that's crazy talk. It was almost definitely just a random encounter. You could go back to that place every day for the next 10 years, and I bet you'd never encounter another Dogman ever again. I said, you could go back there, not me. You couldn't pay me to go back to the spot where I saw the Dogman of Danbury, Connecticut. Got another Dogman story right after this.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
The Dogman of Glastonbury, as told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. Dear Scary Stories, I have something to tell you about that really shook up my life and changed everything for me, even though it's not like the incident took up all that much time. It happened fast and for apparently no reason, yet that was the moment my old life ended and my new life began. All because of Dogman. This was way back in the mid-1970s. I was driving back from Salem, Connecticut to Glastonbury, and I was in between Marlborough and Glastonbury on the last leg of my journey when this all happened. I don't know what people think Connecticut is like, but that drive from Salem north means passing through places with names like Devil's Hop Yard State Park, Babcock Pond Wildlife Management Area, plus 2 or 3 more state parks and state forests. I think I was driving through or past Mishomisik State Forest when everything in my life changed forever. Now, before I tell you what I saw and what happened to me, you should understand that I was an atheist and a proud man before this happened. Nothing against atheists. I still have close friends who think that way. I still think they're all cool, and they all think I've become stupid. Back then, I laughed at people who saw monsters, but in my opinion, this brought some bad karma back down on me. I thought I knew everything, but now I understand that I don't even know the beginning of anything. This world is so mysterious. I've gone from the most closed-minded person in history to being so open-minded, I wouldn't be surprised if space aliens came out of my nostrils and told me I was the grandmother of a Bigfoot. And I'm a guy, so that's probably impossible. Another thing that changed about me after this incident is that I'm a bit paranoid. I don't mean in a clinical sense, since I've never talked to a professional about it. I mean paranoid in the colloquial sense. As in, I'm convinced something is going to jump out at me from behind every corner and every bush. I have nightmares that I wake up screaming from, where monsters are waiting to ambush me. It's a different kind of monster each time. Always something unexpected that I never heard of before. Not like any kind of real animal. Just horrible, new kinds of creatures, deliberately frightening me as though they fed off my fear. I don't like to drive at night at all anymore, but especially on that patch of highway over there. Okay, so this happened at night. Like I said, I was driving north and east on the Veterans of Foreign Wars Highway, and off of the top of a rocky hill to my right, a figure leaped from there directly onto the hood of my car, nearly stopping the vehicle and putting a big dent in my hood. That thing got its balance, and I watched it turn and look me straight in the eye. I swear I never knew what people meant when they said their hair stood on end until that moment, because that's exactly what happened to me. This was like a dog, or maybe a fast-moving sloth, but it was man-sized. It had long hair that made it hard to sort out which parts of it were muscle and bone, and which were just hair or fur. It moved around frantically fast like it was in a frenzy. When it looked me in the eye, I heard a voice telling me to surrender. Not like it was speaking, though. More like I heard the intention of surrender, the suggestion, I guess you could say. I don't know if it was that thing, but at the time, I felt it was trying to hypnotize me, so I hit the gas and I tried to swerve all over the highway to get away. I realized I could no longer drive at normal speeds, and that the animal's leap onto my hood from such a height must have done some serious damage to my engine or something. I drove even crazier as a result, but slower, panicking and wanting to be free of the thing most desperately. I remember thinking that it must be a rabid dog, but of course, that wouldn't explain my feeling of being hypnotized. It also didn't explain how a dog could have planned to attack me. It obviously ambushed me, and I wasn't sure if that was something that dogs were known to do. That's definitely what this guy did. So, through some wild stunt driving, I got the animal off my hood and I drove away as fast as I could manage, which I think was like 40 or 42 miles per hour due to the damage from the attack. I breathed a sigh of relief though, because at least I'd gotten away from the rabid dog or sloth or whatever that huge thing was. Then I saw it. In my rear view mirror, I saw it. It was the shaggy beast, and it was chasing me on its hind legs. It ran like a human, and when it stood that way, it looked an awful lot like a human too. The body proportions weren't that different, although the front legs were much longer. It would occasionally drop to all fours for a few paces, then go back to running upright very similarly to how we do it. There was one major difference from how we humans run when compared to how this upright running shaggy dog-faced thing ran. We humans don't run after cars moving 40 miles per hour and catch up to the cars. I felt almost like I was gonna die of shock right there. I absolutely refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I remember getting angry at reality itself for being so ridiculous. How could I be asked to believe what I was seeing? I remember cursing in frustration and rage, and I remember laughing hysterically at the idea of being eaten for dinner by a large sheepdog that someone taught to run on its hind legs. This was one of those moments when time seems different, and you remember that you always understood that eternity doesn't mean all the time there is. Eternity means the present moment. Every present moment. But it takes a large, shaggy, furiously angry dog man chasing your broken down car at 40 miles an hour in the middle of the night to bring you back to that realization. When you are certain your life is about to end, you start to get very real about your priorities. I watched the creature through my mirror and I saw he was about to grab my bumper. I looked up at the sky thinking this was the last time I would ever get to see the stars. As I thought that, I heard my grandfather telling me the names of the constellations, and I heard my first girlfriend talking about those same stars in a very different way. I knew I had lived a good life and had nothing to complain about, but when that dogman had my bumper in both its claws, I didn't fight that losing battle anymore. I stopped the car. Well, I slowed it down anyway. Then I leaped out of that car door and I ran. I ran down the middle of the grass separation between the two highways, screaming, hoping someone would see or hear me before it was too late. Just like in a movie, a trooper drove up from the opposite direction, saw me, and pulled over. I was laying on the ground, exhausted and panicked. He asked me what happened. I looked around and saw the dogman was gone, and that I was safe. I think I passed out before I could get any words out to him at all. Now, I've called this thing a dogman a few times while telling you the story, but I want to stress that we did not have that word back then, and nobody that I knew of had ever heard of such a creature. It was not a wolf man. It was like a long-haired sheepdog mixed with a man, and had kind of a sloth-like and also dog-like face. It acted as though it could think like a man, but it also acted like a crazed, rabid beast. It was the most unnecessarily terrifying thing I have ever seen, and it made it very hard for me to see the good in this world any longer. I'm okay now, but it was a long road back. Seeing something so unhappy, and seeing how it just seemed devoted to making more unhappiness for other people as well, it just kind of made the world a sadder place for me. I like to think that maybe I just caught the Dogman on a bad night. Maybe he's not that big a jerk all the time. Maybe he's nice to his offspring or to his mate. I have to think stuff like that. It helps me get over my trauma. I also view listening to stories about the Dogman to be therapeutic. Every time, I'm a little less frightened. Well, almost every time. Sometimes, it can be just as bad as the first time. Yet, I survived that encounter and have lived longer since then than my father lived in his total life. I have nothing to complain about, and being scared of Dogman is silly. But still, even to this day, you couldn't pay me to drive anywhere alone at night. Especially not anywhere near the lair of the Dogman of Glastonbury. Well, we got a surprise mystery donation the other day of $50 from someone new to us, and we'd like to say thank you to them, but we aren't certain how to pronounce their handle here. Is that Pat Haneus MC, I think? Hanus? Thank you, our mystery benefactor. We truly appreciate your donation, and we'd love to send you some links to our secret uncensored members-only stories if you write to our scarystoriesnyc@gmail address. Especially in 2024, that was a greatly appreciated donation, and I hope YouTube sends it through to us in about 10 days. If anyone else out there would like to help us stay alive, or maybe you'd just like to see the secret uncensored episodes, you might want to listen to what our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman has to say about it. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.